It started with faint rustling outside his cabin. At first, he thought it was just the wind, or maybe a wild animal passing by. But night after night, she returned, never alone. A mother hyena, and with her, tiny cubs, barely able to walk. She brought them to his doorstep, not for food, not for help, but for something far more unbelievable. This is the true story of a man who formed an unbreakable bond with one of the most misunderstood creatures in the animal kingdom, and how, in the heart of the African wilderness, he became something no one ever expected: family. It began like any other night in the African bush, the kind of night that was quiet but alive. The stars glimmered above, the wind whispered through the grass, and a small wooden cabin stood still near the edge of the wilderness. Inside, an old man, quiet, rugged, and alone, sat by a fire, flipping through an old book. But outside, something moved. At first, it was just a rustle, maybe the wind, maybe a small animal. But the sound grew closer, and then she appeared, a hyena, not lurking, not threatening, just standing in the darkness, watching. The man saw her through the window. He didn't panic. He had lived here for years, observing wildlife, writing in his journals, and understanding animals better than he understood people. But this was different. Hyenas didn't come this close to humans, especially not alone. She didn't snarl, she didn't growl, she just watched him, almost as if she was trying to say something, and then, without a sound, she turned around and disappeared back into the night. He leaned back in his chair, puzzled. "Strange," he whispered to himself. But he had no idea that this was only the beginning, because the very next night, she came back, and this time, she brought company. The following night, the man sat by his window again, waiting, almost against his better judgment. He wasn't sure what he expected to see. Maybe it was all just a one-time curiosity. But as the moon rose and the night deepened, the tall grass outside began to shift. Once again, the soft padding of feet approached, and just like before, she emerged from the shadows, the same female hyena. But tonight, she wasn't alone. Two tiny cubs followed close behind her, stumbling, playful, and barely able to keep up. The man froze, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding just meters from his door. The mother hyena moved slowly, deliberately, before sitting down in the open. The Arsuri UBS tumbled over each other, biting her ears, climbing her back, completely unbothered by the man's presence. She wasn't hiding them. She was showing them to him. He stayed still, heart pounding with both fear and awe. Never in his years had he witnessed this kind of behavior. Predators didn't just bring their young to humans. They hid them, protected them. But night after night, she returned. Same time, same spot. The cubs growing more confident, the visits growing longer. In his notebook, he began to document everything. Hyena, female, returns nightly, brings cubs, no aggression, behavior suggests trust, purpose unknown. Still, one question echoed in his mind every night as he watched her silently lay in the grass. Why? What did she want from him? Days turned into weeks. The visits continued, and the pattern never changed. Every night, just after midnight, the mother hyena would arrive with her cubs. She never begged for food. She never showed signs of aggression. She simply came, laid down outside his cabin, and allowed her cubs to play freely, all within view of the man. At first he kept his distance, only watching from the window, jotting down observations in his worn-out notebook. But slowly, something inside him shifted. Curiosity turned into wonder, and wonder turned into something deeper: connection. He began leaving small bowls of water near the porch, unsure if they'd be touched. By morning, they were empty. Then, without expecting it, one night he stepped outside, not far, just a few steps onto the wooden porch. She looked up at him, her eyes calm, steady. And then, she lowered her head and closed her eyes. It wasn't submission. It was trust. The cubs, growing stronger with each passing night, began inching closer to him. At first, they hid behind their mother, but eventually they started sniffing the air, chasing each other near his boots, tumbling across the dirt without fear. It was as if she had brought them here to learn something, not about survival, but about trust, about gentleness. The man couldn't explain it, not scientifically, not logically. But in those quiet nights under the stars, something unspoken passed between him and that hyena, something most people would never believe. A bond not built with words, but with presence, patience, and quiet understanding. It wasn't until the third month that he noticed something different. The hyena was limping, not badly, but noticeably. Her left hind leg moved stiffly, and she walked slower than before. The man stepped out instinctively, concern in his eyes. She didn't flinch. Instead, she laid down as she always did, breathing heavily, her sides rising and falling with effort. The cubs played on, oblivious, but the man could see it clearly now. She was in pain. That night, he stayed up late, reading through his old field journals, cross-referencing behaviors, injuries, instincts. Something about her visits had been bothering him, but now it was becoming clearer. She wasn't just visiting. She was preparing her cubs for something, for life without her. He realized then she was dying, maybe from old injuries, maybe from age, or maybe just from the harshness of the wild, but whatever it was, she had known it long before he had. And that's why she had brought them here, not for safety, not for food, but for him. She had trusted him with them. A mother, often feared and misunderstood by the world, had seen in him something she could believe in, enough to guide her young to him, night after night, so they'd know kindness before she was gone. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't coincidence. It was choice. And when she didn't come one night, for the first time in nearly 90 days, the man waited until sunrise, heart sinking with each passing hour. At dawn, he walked into the savannah, following the trail he had come to know so well. And there, not far from where they had first met, he found her, peaceful, still, gone. He buried her beneath an acacia tree, just a few meters from the edge of the bush where she had first appeared. No ceremony, no words, just silence, respect, and a heavy heart. The cubs didn't return that night, or the next. He understood. They were wild creatures after all, and yet he hoped they remembered the nights under the stars, the quiet man on the porch, and their mother's trust in him. Weeks passed. Then one evening, just as the sky turned gold and the birds began to quiet, he heard something familiar, the soft rustling in the tall grass. He stepped outside, heart pounding with cautious hope, and there they were, two grown cubs, now taller, stronger, more confident, standing exactly where their mother used to. They didn't come close. They didn't need to. They just stood there, watching him, the way she once had. And then, as quietly as they had come, they disappeared into the dark. Not as strangers, but as something else. A living reminder of a bond that had defied logic, fear, and even species. The man never tried to tame them, never tried to claim them, but in the story of his life, they became the most meaningful chapter, the chapter where a wild hyena, feared by many, had chosen him, not for survival, not for gain, but for love. Sometimes the wild sees us more clearly than we see ourselves, and sometimes trust is the greatest gift an animal can give.